My name is Ben Ilegbodu. I'm here. Welcome to my talk called React Exposed Surprised Face Emoji. I was actually thinking of calling it 10 Revelations about React. Wait until you see number 6. But we don't fall for that kind of clickbait anymore. So I just stuck with React Exposed. I want to mention that I posted a link to the slides on my Twitter account @BenMVP. So if you go there, the slides are already there. So if you're the kind of person like me who likes to take furious notes, you don't have to do that. Slides are already there. You can kind of just sit back and listen in. Or there's a bit.ly, a rather long bit.ly link at the bottom there. If you can see it, bit.ly/ForwardJS -React -exposed. That's a link to the slides as well. But before I actually explain exactly what this talk is about, can I get everyone to stand up? I'm going to get everyone to stand up. We just had, a snack break. It's getting to be the end of the day. I want to get us to kind of get the blood flowing so that there's no one falling asleep. Okay, that's my goal. So, what you don't know is that you already got 2 things out of this talk. You got some light exercise, and you met some people you don't know. So it's already starting good. Okay. So, yes, a little bit about myself again. Ben Ilegbodu. I'm a Christian, a husband, and a father. That's my wife, Rashida. We've been married for 6.5 years or so. Those are our 2 daughters, Simone and Avery. Simone will be 3 next week, and Avery is 6 months old today, actually. So it's our half birthday, I guess. And we live in Pittsburgh, California. So it's still in California, but Pittsburgh. End of the Bay Point, Pittsburgh line. So I take the BART all the way here to San Francisco every day. Because I work at Eventbrite. And if you're not familiar with Eventbrite, we're an online events and ticketing platform where lots of events are hosted, lots of conferences, and you can get tickets to your events there. And I am the manager of our front-end platform team. So we're responsible for basically everything about the front end of Eventbrite. And one of our big projects this last year or so has been converting our legacy Backbone Marionette infrastructure over to React. And I found as I was kind of teaching people React formally in workshops and informally by pairing and helping, that I found myself explaining a lot about how React works, even though I've never looked at any of the code really. I'm not on the React team or whatever. It's as I'm trying to explain why you have to do certain things in React, I have to explain how React works. So kind of explaining the abstraction leaks in React. So my target audience for this talk are those who are kind of already have dabbled in React a little bit, but haven't gone too deep in it. But if you have done a lot in React already, I'm sure you're going to learn a few things, but maybe the big thing you'll get out of it is how to teach others about how React works and explain those things. So any good UI library is an abstraction, right? It's supposed to abstract away all of the magic, as Shaya is pointing out to us, the magic, about the difficulties and complexities that you're trying to do. So you don't have to worry about how it works. You just use the library, it does its magic, and you can build whatever you want to build. And React is no different. It has all kinds of magic that makes it run well. The virtual DOM diffing is a great example. And for the most part, you don't need to know how React works. But as you're developing, there's some kind of oddities, abstraction leaks, you can call them, that happen in React. And you need to kind of, if you understand how React works under the hood, it makes more sense why you have to do what you have to do. So this talk is basically explaining that, how React works so you can understand why you do some things you do. So let's just jump right in. I got a couple examples that I want to show you. First is going to be tackling JSX. So if you're coming from a traditional templating background, you may do something like this in JSX. And oh, by the way, I'm going to be using some ES6, ES 2015 type syntax, new JavaScript. So if you're not familiar with that, I'm showing it on purpose, not for me to show off, but just to expose you to some new syntax. So along the way, you can learn some new things as well. So here we have a component. It's called the page component, and it's returning some markup. The markup, the container is main. You have an H1 that you can see there with the heading, and then a page body component, which is a helper component that's described above. And that page body is trying to return an aside and a section. So because we know that page body is going to be inserted right there under the H1, so we want to be able to just stick that content in there. But unfortunately, when we run it, we get this error that says that adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. And if you have developed in React, this is like one of the first things you come across. You're just like, why? Like, I know what's going in there. Like, I don't want to add an extra tag there, but you do. And I'll explain why in a second. I want to jump into another issue that you have. So conditionals in JSX. What if you want to optionally include some markup? Other templating languages like handlebars, or if you're doing server-side languages, they'll introduce syntax in the templating language that allow you to do some kind of logic. And so some kind of conditional statement. And you may be wondering, how do you do that in React? So if you may try something like this, obviously this looks like completely broken syntax with all those curly braces around. So you're probably just wondering how it's going to work. But if you tried to do something like this, of course you get a syntax error that says that that if statement can't be there in the syntax. So you want to know how to do adjacent markup. You want to know how to do conditionals in JSX. Another issue is commenting in JSX. How do I do comments? If you're coming from a traditional background, JSX looks like markup, so you would think that you could do an HTML comment. But if you do this syntax to comment out markup here, or trying to comment out the class name, or trying to comment out line 2 in those examples, of course, we get another error that says unexpected token, you're doing it wrong, basically. And then the last one I wanted to show is unexpected prop names. So if you're familiar with React, if you've done React before, you know that if you have a label tag, or any tag, for instance, the prop is not class, it's class name. But if you're just jumping in and thinking JSX is just like HTML, of course you'd use class, because that's how HTML works. And of course you would use for a label, because that's how HTML works. But you'll find out that a label should have class name and HTML4, not class and for. And the interesting thing about this is that you will get no error when this executes. It just won't work. You won't have a class in the resulting HTML, or the for won't be there, as you would expect. So when this is happening to you, you're sitting there like, why? But why? Why is this happening? And the answer is JSX. Is that JSX looks like HTML, but it's not HTML. I think it makes React super approachable, because it's a very familiar syntax, but it's not exactly HTML. It's actually JavaScript. The JSX gets transpiled by Babel, the transpiler, into actual JavaScript code. So if you've never looked at the Babel output of a transpiled JSX, this is kind of what it looks like. So if you have a span tag with the class name of old and some content that says vintage, it actually gets transpiled into React create element. The first argument is the name of the tag as a string, span, and then any attributes or props on that node is the second object. And the last object is one or more pieces of content inside of it. And then similarly, if you declare your own component, here I have selector with prop values and assigning this variable called items. It will also be a React create element, except the reference for the first argument is a reference to the class, the selector class that I've defined somewhere above and imported. So JSX is actually just JavaScript. And when you think about it that way, it makes sense that adjacent JSX elements doesn't work. Because basically what we're trying to do with page body is return back 2 objects at the same time from a function. And we know that you can't do that. You have to return one element. It can be a string, a Boolean, a number. It can be one object. It can be one array with multiple things in it, but you have to return one thing. And what we're actually doing here is trying to return two things, which is not possible. So then, of course, you have to wrap that those two things in a div, in a span, in a main, or whatever tag you want, and have it there so that there's one top-level component. And that will actually get transpiled down to a nested React.create element. So you have your div, it doesn't have any props, so the second argument is null, and then the aside and the section are themselves React.create element calls, and they're there as a third and fourth parameter to React.create element. So there's the reason for that with the adjacent JSX elements. Conditionals can actually be solved by just using normal JavaScript. Since a whole React component is all in a JavaScript file and JSX is just JavaScript, you can just pull out the conditional ahead of time. So declare a variable, we call it heading. If the heading text exists, then we assign the heading variable that JSX, the H1, and then we put that down in the markup. So then when this is transpiled, what you get is just normal JavaScript, React.create element, and the section tag is the first parameter. The class name, of course, is the object with the second parameter. And then our heading variable becomes the first content, which is actually the content up above. And then the React element, the p tag, is the second piece. So I've noticed that people feel like this is too verbose, basically. You have to split up all these multiple lines to declare this. So instead, what they'll do is use a ternary operator inside of the JSX to keep it nice and compact. But I personally feel that this makes the JSX, it can be more messy, basically. Like what happens instead of it being null, there was actually a false case, and you had two things that you were putting there. Or what if it was more complicated than just an H1? What if you had a div with a whole bunch of content? Then all of a sudden, your ternary becomes multiple lines. Like I've seen 10, 15, 20 line ternaries inside of renders just to do conditional statements. So at Eventbrite, we kind of have a rule that we always want our JSX, our renders, to be clean, to just be JSX, variables, helper components, and split out all of the logic either at the top of the render function or in separate helper functions to kind of keep it clean. So commenting, I'm still not too thrilled about how to do commenting in JSX. So if you want to comment out props, you just put double slash in front of a prop. But if you want to comment out actual markup, you put the block comments inside of the curly braces around it. One cool thing that I noticed is that when it actually gets transpiled, that code gets removed out of the transpiled code. So we see that you have null for the second parameter of create element instead of class name card being commented out, for instance. And there's only one piece of content being added to the div, line 1, because line 2 is being commented out. But since this syntax is still kind of ugly in my opinion, I only use it for debugging purposes. I would never actually commit code with these comments in there because it's just, it's pretty ugly in my opinion. And then lastly, the unexpected prop names. The reason why it's class name, the reason why it's HTML4 is because React actually mirrors the JavaScript DOM API. So if you get an element by ID, for instance, and it's a label tag, you would read the class name property. You would set the class name property, not the class property. And the reason for that is when the JavaScript DOM API came out, it was before ES5, class, and for were reserved words, so you couldn't actually use them as properties on objects. So it's class name, it's HTML4. So that's why it's also on click, on mouse over, those sorts of properties for the props in your tags as opposed to just being click and mouse over, for instance. So class you can still set as a prop, it just doesn't do anything. So you need ESLint rules to kind of help prevent you from doing those things and falling into a case where you're expecting one thing but getting another. Okay, so that was JSX. That was kind of the simple things. If you've done React, you're kind of already familiar with that. What I want to do is be like the Smurf and dig a little deeper, okay? So let's talk about a new problem and talk about the virtual DOM. So can anybody spot the error in this code? Anybody familiar with React? What do you said? The key is missing is what he said. So if you run this code, what you'll get is an error that says, warning, each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. Check the render method of selector, and it gives you a link. So one thing I really appreciate about React is that it actually gives you these kind of warnings. Like some other library that you're using, it'll just be some random stack trace in the library that says undefined is not defined, and you're like, what? What is going on? So at least it gives you some hint as to what's going on, because the result is that whatever you're trying to render as an array, you would only get one option back instead of seeing all of the options. So if you're unfamiliar with this problem, what you'll do is you'll go to that link, helpful link that it gives you, and it'll explain what that means. Or if you're familiar with the problem and you just forgot the key, you may end up doing something like this, where you don't get the warning anymore because you set the index, which is the second parameter of a map function. So that'll be 0, 1, 2, 3. You'll set that as the key. So that's a unique value now, and you don't get the warning anymore. But I'm still suggesting that you should not do this, okay? This is an anti-pattern using the key. So in this example, right, all of you are the two folks behind the desk, right? That balled up piece of paper, that's you using index as key. And I am Dikembe Mutombo swatting it away, telling you, no, 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 not in my house, do not do that, okay? Instead, what you should do is use a value in your object that you're iterating over that is unique, that's predictable, that's stable, instead of using the index, because the index is an anti-pattern. So here, because we know that the value is being set as the value of an option, it's going to be unique because it needs to be unique for the option to work. So use that value as the key instead of using the index. So hopefully you're standing here saying, why? Like, why should I do this? There's no more error anymore. It works just fine. There's no problems with my code. And it's best explained with a demo, okay? So I'm going to demo right here. I have an example, example to show you here. So sample demo page that I put up. So here's example. Let me blow this up as well. Yeah, that's good and big. Example. So what I do, I click add, and a new word gets added to the top. So they're listed 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to show that that is the key that's being used. Okay? And if I add another one to the top, then they reorder. And Schenkel got added to the top. So if we inspect the page now, I want you to focus on what's going on here on the right-hand side. Let me blow that up as well for you. Okay, so I click add. I want you to watch what's happening on this right-hand side when I click add. So I'm going to add a new thing, Bergdagen. Okay. I've added Bergdagen, and if you watch over here, all of the LIs updated. But if we were implementing this ourselves, right, all you would do is just add the LI to the top, because that's all you needed to do. But what React did was go through all the LIs and change all the values to match now the new order. And So React uses key as a mechanism for its virtual DOM. Diffing is what it's called. So when you re-render the application, it looks at the array that you're trying to render before and after and uses the key to map to see what was the same before and after. So right now I'm saying Bodine is at key 0. So when I add something and now say rump is at 0, it takes 0 and 0 and says, those are the same thing. Oh, well, now the content should be rump, and it replaces it. And 1 used to be Burdoggin, and now it's become Bodine. So let me update it to be Bodine. And it goes down the list and keeps going until it gets to number 10, Brisket, and it says, oh, I didn't have a key for that. So let me just add that to the bottom. So that's why at the end you see the last one get added. So this, for your normal app, you wouldn't necessarily notice that this is happening, but this is actually poor performance because it's making all of those updates. So let's try the example now of using the unique value, what I'm suggesting that you do instead. So now what's in parentheses here is the key that's being set. So Bacon has a key of value 7, Ipsum value 8, and so forth. So now when I add in here, in our LIs, so I want you to watch what happens to the LIs. So when I add something, it just adds the thing to the top, and that's it, nothing else updated. So it did, in its intelligence, in its magic, it did what was right. It just added it to the top because I said that Bacon was value 7. And when it re-rendered, tail or value 19 got added as a key, and it was like, I've never seen that before. And it added it to the top. And then they got to the second one and said, oh, value 7, I had that before, and it's still the same Bacon, so I don't need to do anything. And it doesn't need to do anything from then on out. So, like I said, the index as key is fine in terms of it not being broken, but imagine instead of having individual LIs, these were search results that were rich with images and other kind of UI elements, and you were re-rendering all of those unnecessarily, updating all of those images unnecessarily, 30 of them, 40 of them, 60 of them, however many you have on the page. That will result in poor performance, as opposed to just adding something or changing what needs to be changed. So that's why it's important to use unique value as key. But I want to dig a little deeper and look at one more thing. Can I ask you a question at the end? Okay. Look at one more example, and then I'll take questions. So I want to talk about forms and form inputs. So creating dynamic forms on the web have always been challenging with whatever library you're using. If you're just wanting to do a simple form submit with no validation and just post to a page, that's really easy. But having sophisticated UIs and form warnings and scrolling to places, it's been complicated. And with React, it's no different, unfortunately. So here I have a form component. It just renders an input, text input field, and that's great. But if you're unfamiliar with React and you're just wanting to add an input field with a default value, you may do something like this and add a value as your default value, because that's what you would do normally. But unfortunately, you'll get another warning. It is a verbose warning. It does tell you what's going on, but it may be a little cryptic if this is the first time you're dealing with it. So it says, failed form prop type. You've provided a value prop to a form field without onChange handler. This will result in a read-only field. If the field should be mutable or should change, use default value. Otherwise, set either onChange or read-only. Check the render of form. Okay, so it made like 3 different suggestions for what you should do, and you don't really know what you should do. You just wanted to default the value, so you just add, hey, I'll add default value. And what will happen is that you'll get that previous warning again, and you'll get a new warning here. And still the result on the website is that the text input field renders with incorrect, but you can't type in it. Like, it just doesn't change. All you have is just incorrect. It's not working like you would expect. So at least this one tells you that when you have an input field that's a text field with both value and default value, you can't do that. That you either need to make them controlled or uncontrolled, and you do that by specifying either value or default value. But at least this one, it gives you a link. So now you can go and read about controlled inputs, or controlled components rather, and it'll tell you about uncontrolled and controlled inputs. And you'll learn that an uncontrolled input, you just specify the default value. And when it's uncontrolled, that means it's uncontrolled by React. React has no idea what its value is. You can go in there and type, and the browser controls what the value is. So it's like a browser component, basically. So you're typing, you're changing values, and it's all fine. The way that you'd have to get the value back is using a ref, if you're familiar with that in React. And the reason why you would use an uncontrolled input is if you're using React with another framework, let's say Backbone and Marionette, and you don't want React to control it, you would use this and use refs. And that's how that would work. But with React, they suggest that you make controlled components. And you declare a controlled component by specifying the value and then also specifying an on change. Because what React wants you to do is you specify the initial value, on change, the value changes, you'll update some state, and as a result of the state changing, your whole UI will re-render, and then now you'll set the new value. It's kind of the whole React loop that goes on there. So what I've done here, though, is I've trying to fake out React. I have an on-change handler, so I don't get any warnings now, but all I'm doing is just logging it to the console. And I'm doing this because I wanted to show you something kind of interesting that happens with this. So let me go to the last example here. So those fields are big enough. So let me go to the console there. So here we see the warning that's happening because of this incorrect one. So this is an uncontrolled. I can go in here and I can type however I want. But if I go to the one without on change, as you can see, I can't type in there. But look what happens when I go to the third one that has value, but the dummy on change. So I'm going to type, whatever I type is going to show up in the console because I have a console.log of the change. So I'll type M. So there was no M in the field, yet the on-change handler said that the changed value was fakeum. If I press an R, I'm a faker, apparently. If I do the backspace, it removes it, even though the field never updated. I can move my key over and put a N, and we see it there. So what this is telling me is that the way React works is that it uses synthetic events for a total event system because it has one event at the top of the DOM and then does event delegation. But what this is telling me is that the on-change event that gets fired just gets the last keystroke that I made and gives me kind of a fake event that happened because an on-change didn't actually happen in the input field because nothing actually changed. So if I go down now, so what they want to do, like I showed here, is they want you to do this real implementation. So this was the implementation I was talking about. So this is the simplest version. You have your state, you initialize it here, and then now that becomes what gets set as the value here. You on change, you set the target value to with the set state that re-renders everything, and now your new value is there. So that's what's happening here. So I've also done a console.log here, and we see that as I'm backspacing, it has the same experience as before, But it's actually, the only reason the input field is changing is because I am setting it in React, not because of what I typed. So what I type is not actually updating the field. It's actually React that's coming back in and setting it. So when I'm typing in a field like this, it's actually not the field. It's React constantly updating it, but doing it in a way that's performant enough that you can't even tell the difference of how it works. So again, you're asking the question, but why is it that the way that this works? Why did you have to have uncontrolled components versus controlled components? And what's up with that prevention of typing in the field? Why is it implemented the way that it is? And the reason is because if React didn't know the difference between a controlled and uncontrolled component, when your UI got re-rendered and you had been typing in a field, it wouldn't know if it should replace that value or if it should keep it. So if you had typed and didn't respect putting the value back in the input field, it would just blow away all the stuff that you typed in. And then now what is in the UI and what React believes is the case are two different things. And it can't have that if it's trying to do differentials of the DOM versus the virtual DOM. And you would be in a worse situation if that was the case. So basically, preventing you from typing is actually saving you from pain from further down the line. So there are more things that I could explain, more little tidbits about React, but running out of time here, so I wanted to point you to some additional resources. If you have the slides, you'll be able to click all of those links. So the demo, a link to the demo there, an article about why key is an anti-pattern, and also an explanation of controlled components versus uncontrolled components. And then lastly here, or second to last, is Eventbrite. We have a whole style guide about how to write React and best practices, basically. So if you're looking for a way to follow, we have that, and we have ESLint rules to support it. And then lastly, React has this whole fiber architecture, which is kind of a re-implementation of the underpinnings of React. So some of the stuff I just talked about may change in the next version of React. Hopefully not too much of what I said will get torpedoed, but it's something that you can read if you're particularly interested about the implementation. So to wrap up, I just wanted to give a couple of shout outs. I wanted to shout out ForwardJS, the organizers especially, for having me here to come and speak and share with you guys. Also Eventbrite for allowing me to come and share and supporting me in it. Technically, I'm still on the clock, so that's a good thing for me, at least. But Eventbrite is a great company to work for as well. We have a lot of opportunities to kind of try out all these different things and kind of learn as we build things. So really fun and enjoyable atmosphere there. And then lastly, I wanted to thank all of you for showing up to the talk. There were a number of other great talks at the same time. If I wasn't giving this talk, I would have been somewhere else. I probably wouldn't have picked my talk, I guess is what I'm saying. But I'm glad that you picked this talk, so I'm not talking to nobody. But the whole purpose of why I do this, or the main reason why I do this, is that I want you to leave as a better developer than what you came in, that you learned at least something so that tomorrow you'll be able to apply what you learned or share what you learned to improve yourself. So I hope that I was able to bring that across and that you're able to grow from that. And with that, thank you very much. Appreciate it.